All right, welcome everybody to the Elder Care Network webinar series, and we have our own webinar series inside of the Grief Gab with Linda. And let me introduce Linda, and then I'm going to hand this to her because, like always, everybody, I'm just a student here like you. I just get the luxury of playing moderator while I'm at it. So welcome, Linda, who is the owner of Mourning Discoveries, and that's Mourning, which she's going to talk a lot about today. And she has worked in the funeral services industry since '94. She specializes in offering integrated grief care solutions to funeral homes. She also is a well-published author, 6-book set, which is called the Family Care Series. She's got the Grief Care Library, specialty cards. She is the creator of WebKey Grief Care and also the creator of the Grief Cruises. And I will ask her about that later on in our series. But without further ado, let me go ahead and introduce Linda Findlay. Linda, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with us. Really excited about this next 8 weeks we're going to spend together, and go ahead and tell everybody what we're going to learn today, even though it's right there on their screen.
Yes, thank you, Jonathan. Oh, it's my pleasure to be here. I'm so excited about this webinar series. So today's session, we're going to talk about the grief brain. And what I'm going to ask you is to try and forget about what you thought you knew about the stages of grief. The stages of grief is one of my soapboxes that I've been sitting on for so many years because people don't associate with the stages of grief. Their experience doesn't line up with what has been taught for many, many years. And in all due respect to Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, she's the one who originally, developed the stages of grief, which were mainly to be used for patients who were dying. And so somehow it was picked up in our culture, and it was shared, and it still is to this day. And whenever I see about the stages of grief, I kind of get a little annoyed about it. But, I think it's important that when we work with grieving people, either working with grieving people or for ourselves who might be grieving, to understand the grief brain, because there is things that really go on in our brain that inhibit us in our functioning. And so that's really important to have a better understanding of that. So I'm going to switch the slide, Jonathan.
Great.
So when we ask, what is grief? A technical explanation of what grief is, it's a neurocognitive pain that causes significant disruption in the brain's cognitive processes. And that sounds like a mouthful, right? But it's very easy to understand. Our brains are literally hijacked when we're grieving. And that's a good way to identify with that, either when you're working with families or, you're experiencing it yourself, is that your normal function, what would have been normal for you, is just compromised. And it literally is because your brain is hijacked. I tell my funeral directors when those families are sitting at the conference table at the time of need to keep that in mind, because, they're asking them a lot of questions. They're trying to, help them through the process of making their arrangements and understanding that it is a real physiological thing that's going on in the brain. So that's really the first thing that we need to understand. So you're going to change to the next slide, please. So, we talk about grief models, and there's many stages out there, many models out there, many descriptions. And just to briefly go over them, I think most people are familiar with the Kubler-Ross 5 stages. People go through the denial, the anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance. There's a, dual process with Strobe and Shaw. I mean, these are I just wanted to present these just because these are out there. They're very valid. When they talk about the different responses to loss, when you say to accept the reality of the loss with the 4 tasks with Warden, how do we really accept the person, our loss in our life, right? Do we ever get to that point where we truly accept that person has died? And I don't think that word is acceptable. It's almost as though we need to learn to live without that person being a part of our life. And what that means, them being a part of our life in front of us every day. And there's so many ways that our loved ones are part of our life, and there's a lot to grieve. And so just to be familiar with, the models, they are very valid as far as the different responses to loss. But if you switch to the next slide, I'm going to tell you what grief really looks like. This is how grief works. And I love this diagram because I've had so many people say to me, especially in the trainings that I've done, I have a particular short story about a reverend that was in one of our trainings, and he was really interested in developing curriculum for clergy because he said that there was no real education for grief care. And so he said he gets so many people come up to him and say, what is grief? Like, what is it? And so I pulled out it was a PDF, and I pulled it out and I showed it to him. There was like complete silence. And I said, show that to people, like literally have that on hand when you're doing your trainings or you're talking to your colleagues. And he's like, I love it. He's like, because really it's like how this really works is that, grief is different for everybody. There's just a mishmash of all kinds of, different responses and reactions that we have when we lose somebody that we love. And these responses don't just occur shortly after the loss, right? They occur for weeks, for months, for years. And that's one thing that I'm going to emphasize throughout this webinar series is that, we can't look at time frame when we talk about grief, because grief affects us for the rest of our lives. When I'm working with families, 2, 3, 4, 5 years down the road, particularly for bereaved parents, they are still actively grieving the loss of their loved one. So what I look at is their function in life. And I think what we ultimately learn is that grief and joy can coexist. And our brains will be able to put those two things together. And as the time goes on, it's not so much the amount of time that goes on, it's what we do during that time. And what we're doing is we're learning. While we're grieving, we're learning, how am I going to live my life with this person not being a part of it? And there's so much involved in that. And it's really hard for families. And the person looks the same as they looked before their loss. They're going on in their life. So to the outside world, it looks like, well, they must be doing okay. And then what happens is the people who care for them ask them, how are you doing? And most times people will say, well, I'm okay. So guess what? They're telling you I'm okay, but yet they're still grieving. There's all kinds of things going on for them emotionally and physically and cognitively, and they're not going to share any of that. So then the rest of their world just figures, oh, they've moved on. They look the same as they did before their loss. And they said they're doing okay. So there you have it. And that's what happens as time goes on, is that people lose that support that they might have had in the beginning of their loss journey. And, when we think about it, employers still give only 3 days bereavement leave. I mean, that is nowhere near sufficient for families to even begin the process of healing and getting through their day. And so I think that's really interesting, because as you know, I've worked in the funeral industry spanning 4 decades. That's a long time. And the conversations that I've had with people 35 years ago are the same exact conversations I have with people today. The needs are the same. And the issue continues that there is such a gap when it comes to grief care, that truly we need to do something that's going to close that gap. And where that begins is in grief care education, is really trying to understand and learn about what grief is and how it affects people. So I love this diagram. I would suggest anybody to, take a screenshot of it. You can find it on the internet, and really that is just a good way to say your brain is hijacked. There's no wrong or right way getting through this grief journey. Everybody's very different. Even people in the same family that lost the same loved one, their grief journey is going to be different. And what happens in that scenario is that when we lose our loved one, we expect those closest to us to be the most supportive, and they just can't be. So when we're working with families, that's a good thing to recognize as well, that there's all those family dynamics that are going on, amongst the family members, and that sometimes there's conflict, because I feel like my sister should be able to support me when I lost my mom, but she's also grieving. So that's something important to remember. And again, when I work with my funeral directors, I say, don't assume that one family member is going to grieve different than the other, or any of those things. If we're going to provide grief care, we should be providing it to all the family members. We should have tools and means to do that, which is really, really important. So we'll go to the next slide, please. Do you have any questions yet, Jonathan?
No, a lot of this makes sense. It makes sense that it doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
When we go through this.
Yeah. So how does grief affect us? It affects us behaviorally, cognitively, emotionally, physically, and spiritually. So that is our whole being. That is all of what we're made up out of. And so what are some things that, behavioral, how does it affect us behaviorally? It's like we might do some things that maybe otherwise we wouldn't do. And one of the downsides to that is that sometimes people do things that they put themselves in harm's way. I like to use an example of, somebody on the road driving, and they normally would be a very calm, patient driver. And then all of a sudden somebody does something that annoyed them, and they have a little bit of road rage. That would be a dangerous behavior. So people's behaviors change, and not, again, because they're, obviously they're not thinking straight, but there's things that we do and don't do behaviorally that grief has affected us. And so our daily behaviors can change. And again, I will always emphasize this is not just those few weeks, those few months, that first year. Later on in the webinar series, I'm going to talk about that second year and beyond, and why that's so important that we continue to provide grief care and support and understanding during that time period as well, because there's all different needs during that second year. So I'm excited to be able to talk a little bit about that. And there's opportunity for us to provide that space and that support, again, that is not provided anyplace else. Anyway, we have the tools that we can do that. Cognitively, people aren't thinking straight, right? They're making decisions, and they're trying to, put their affairs in order, or their loved ones' affairs in order. And sometimes things go wrong. You often hear how they say, don't make any, I like that word, don't make any major decisions when you're grieving. And there's a real reasonable reason why we shouldn't do that, because we're not making the best decisions that we can make. And that's a real thing, that people make big mistakes when they're grieving because they're cognitively not thinking correctly. One of the biggest thing is people say, I need to leave my home. I need to sell my home. And there are circumstances that financially people really need to do that. But what I tell people is, if you don't have to make that decision right now, if you can financially stay where you are, because guess what? There's a couple things that can happen. One is, no matter where you go, you're going to take your grief with you. And sometimes when you're in a familiar surroundings, which is your home that you've been in for whatever amount of time with your loved one, not having that familiar atmosphere can be even more disturbing for somebody who's decided to sell their home and move to a new location or a new place, and they're not familiar with anything. And that puts people off balance, that they're not familiar. So that's another reason. And again, making the mistakes, we can all say in hindsight, I should have done this, that, or the other thing, but you can't go back and redo anything. So if you make those major decisions, we recommend that that people don't make those major decisions unless they absolutely have to. And then if they have to make those decisions, we need to support them even more. We need to create those opportunities to support them through those major changes. Obviously, emotional, we are affected by grief emotionally. And, when you talk about the stages of grief, they say there's the anger, the denial, the this, that, the other thing. So this is this emotional response. There's so many, some people cry, other people don't cry. And that doesn't mean that they're grieving any less. And I can compare that to a man's experience of grief. Men don't cry as easily as women. And so because they don't cry, women might think, well, he's not grieving. Think about that scenario with grieving parents again. The man's not saying anything and he's trying to be strong for mom, but yet he's still grieving, probably just as powerful as mom is. The same thing with widows and widowers. I mean, I work with widowers who are deeply grieving the loss of their wife, but they're not expressing it. They're not showing their emotion, but because they're not showing it doesn't mean it's not there. It truly is there. We just need to help them to find better ways to deal with it. And one thing that I tell people when you're working with especially men, it's important when you talk to them to ask them what they think about a situation or a feeling or a thought, as opposed to saying, how do you feel about that? So if we ask a grieving, widower, say, what do you think about that? As opposed to, well, how do you feel about that? Because when you put that word feelings in there, that can get kind of messed up. So anyways, there's a lot of emotional responses to loss. And then there's the physical responses, which are very real. And people experience the physical responses. If you had headaches in the past, you might have more headaches. If you had, a weak stomach, you might have a worse stomach problem. So all these things are real. And so what we do recommend is, at least during that first 6 months, to have people go get checked out by their family physician. That you want to make sure that things that are going on are related to your grief. The downside to that is a lot of people do go to their physicians, and the first thing they do is offer medications. Things that might help them to numb some of what they're feeling. And sometimes medications are really needed, but just to take care of the physical aspects of your whole being, to make sure that there really isn't anything going on. And then it affects us spiritually. I have families that I've worked with that, they might have been very faithful in their religion or whatever their practices were in spirituality. And then they have a loss and they no longer look at that, and they doubt it and they question it. And then there's others that maybe weren't so strong in their faith that all of a sudden they find comfort in that. And what I tell people is that, it's a good time to explore. Simple as that, because you can get real iffy when you talk about, God and spiritual issues with people who are grieving. I just had a lady yesterday who told me I recommended, I always recommend different types of support groups for people. And I mentioned Grief Share, which is a faith-based support group. And she was like, oh, no. She goes, I'm not going down that road with God with anybody. And I was like, okay, which is fine. Again, being caregivers of people who are grieving, we are not there to judge people. We're there to support them. We're there to create that opportunity for them to be able to experience whatever it is that they're grieving. So I guess we'll go to the next slide, please. Oops, I think that one's not supposed to be in there, but okay. So I went through all of this. So go through these. I must have sent you the wrong presentation. So just
okay. More details for everybody.
Go back one.
Go back one. All right, here we go.
Okay, so when we talk about, again, how does grief affect people? So we've got this sheet, I call it Common Feelings. This is actually in my book, and I think it's page 9 in my book 1 in my series, the Family Care series. And you would be amazed how helpful this list is, particularly if you're talking to families, if you're running any kind of support groups or any kind of outreach in your community. All you need to do is have people look at this list and pick something out. And that will facilitate a wonderful conversation. So being familiar with some of these common feelings are really helpful when we're working with grieving people. And then also it's helpful to share that list and say, hey, pick something out that resonates with you. And I've had more people call me about page 9 in book 1 than any other page in any of the 6 books that I have. So it's really helpful to be familiar with that and help people, because sometimes if you can identify what it is that you're feeling, that can help you to think it through, talk it through, and things like that. And that's what people need. So what do people need when they're grieving? They need that opportunity to talk about what's going on for them. They truly, truly need grief education. They truly need to know what is grief? How does it affect people? People need to know that what they're experiencing, it doesn't mean there's something wrong with them. Because oftentimes people think as time goes on, particularly, again, this conversation I just had yesterday, I was talking about, it's common that during 2 to 4 months after a loss, it's common for people to experience what we call heightened awareness of their loss. And there's a lot of reasons for that. When I was talking to this lady yesterday, she goes, oh my gosh, she goes, I'm right at the 4-month mark. People need to know that what they're experiencing is okay. They're not going crazy. And that's our role as caregivers, is to assure people that what you're experiencing, I say, as long as you're not hurting yourself or others, it's okay. Because that's important. We don't do anything that's going to hurt ourselves or other people. Other than that, this grief thing is just a mishmash of all types of feelings and thoughts and reactions that if we're aware of them, we won't think that they're foreign and there's something wrong with people. We don't think there's something wrong with us. And then I just like this little diagram, the stages of grief, how it's the ribbon and it's all like, twisting and turning, and actually we look at what is normal functioning. This is all normal functioning when we're grieving. And then what we ultimately hope that we can do at the end of the day. And again, I wish I can tell people you're going to get from point A to point B. This is how long it's going to take. And this is what you need to do. Unfortunately, we can't do that. But what we do is we return to what we call a meaningful life, right? We need to find new meaning, things that are then important to us, that we establish a new sense of normalcy. And that's what we do. And then what's most important, what I tell people, is when the rest of the world is telling us that we need to let go and move on, what we truly need to do is hang on. We need to find lifelines that help us to feel connected to our loved ones. And that's, as caregivers, how we can help people to find and suggest those lifelines. How can I make my loved one a part of my day? How can I make my loved one a part of a special day if it's their birthday or holiday? And there's things that we can do that help us to maintain that connection, because ultimately that we want to maintain that connection with them. They're never going to be gone from our hearts and from our minds. So we help people to establish those connections. And there's many ways that we can do that. And through this course, this webinar, we'll be talking about some different ways that we can help people to maintain connection with their loved ones. It's as simple as, if you're having a hard day and your loved one's favorite color was purple, wear purple. You know that you're doing that for that person. And so that becomes something special and helps us to feel that we're connected to them still. Because we need that. We need to stay connected to them. We're never going to forget them. We're never going to not love them. But we need to find ways of how now can we feel still connected to them.
Love that.
Yeah. All right. So let's go to the next slide. So here we are again, what we call the grief dance. And kind of this is in conclusion of what we're trying to talk about today, is that, that we don't want to look at the stages of grief. I mean, it's okay to know what the different stages are and the different responses, like that list that I showed you. But as you can see, it's just a whole mishmash of things that people feel and experience, and it can get so confusing. People need the support ongoing for the long haul. Not just those first few months. When I call families 6 months down the road, they're telling me I'm the only person who's calling them and asking them how they're doing. And I actually need to mention this as well, is that I never ask a person that I'm talking to, how are you doing? They hate that question. What I say to them is, how is your day going? So if you don't take anything else away from our talk today, is to remember that asking people, how are you doing? Most times they're going to say, okay. Or they're going to say, well, I'm taking one day at a time, whatever. They're going to come up with something that's just going to diminish what's actually going on for them. So when I say to families, how's it going for you today? I can't tell you how many times, which I know that this work is ordained for me, is when I call and they say, oh my gosh, I'm just so happen to have such a bad day today. You called at the right time. And, that then goes into a conversation that I can facilitate and have, again, open up that opportunity for them to talk. And that's what we can do as caregivers. We don't do a lot of talking ourselves. We do mostly listening and validating, because people need their loss to be acknowledged and they need it to be validated. And that's what we can do for people who are grieving, is to acknowledge their loss, validate it, give them the opportunity to talk about it, steer them in the right direction for resources. Because remember, their brains are hijacked. They don't have the ability to go look for resources themselves. With the internet, there's all kinds of information. So we can support people best by providing those resources for them and directing them to them, whether it's a support group, articles, whatever it is, podcasts, videos. We can do that for people. So with that, I hope you learned something that you didn't know, even if it's some way to help somebody else. And I look forward to the next webinar in 2 weeks. And I think what we've got coming up is, let's see. So for our session 2, we've got grief, the first year. How long does the grief journey actually last? And you may be surprised. So hopefully you'll join us in 2 weeks, and we'll continue our conversation. We'll continue our grief gab about loss and grief.
Thanks a lot, Linda. So a comment and then a question for you. One of them is, I love the asking how their day is going. And I think that's a genius question to be able to ask, because not only can they be able to focus on the here and now, but I also think it's a great thing to say, today's a better day. Today's a good day, but boy, yesterday was tough. And then, so it allows you to be able to say, okay, well, tell me about that. But at least that way, those token statements, I love the idea of just deep probing questions anyway, that actually make you think. But that's you're focusing on the now. And if there is anything that they need to share, maybe it just isn't the token statement that they're used to be able, to give, because everybody is just wanting to just say, how you doing? And that's a complicated ask anyway. I do have a question about, because this was kind of a double-edged sword when you said it, and I totally agree with having stability and familiarity in the home. But I also wonder, Linda, in my own family, when my father passed, and my stepmother has mementos all over the home of all of the memories of the world travel and the times that they had together. And I'm wondering, what might you recommend when it talks about, that every square inch of the home is covered, with memories of them together? And I feel like that kind of prolongs her grief a little bit. And I'm wondering, what your thoughts are. I can't imagine her anywhere else, because the lack of familiarity, I think, would be really tough in the grieving process. But I also look at this as that everywhere she looks, she's reminded of him and their time together. What are your thoughts on that?
Oh gosh, I got a lot of thoughts on that, because I deal with that quite frequently. I always tell people, if it's your space that these belongings and these treasures are occupying, it is up to that person whose space it belongs to. And I know that looking at that, we can think that that is constant reminders and things that are hurtful, but those things soften as time goes on, right? So those mementos and those special memories at first may be hard to look at. I mean, I've worked with people I had one gentleman who I was working with. He said he had a whole shrine for his wife. He had with all her special things on it. And every other time I talked to him, he took it down. and again, it was his choice. Either he has it up and out and displayed. And if it makes him cry, that's not a bad thing. If it makes him feel bad. But I always suggest that if it makes you feel that bad, just turn the pictures down, put them away for a little while. But if people are leaving these things up, I venture to say that I think that they need them to be there. Otherwise, they would remove those. We may see that as, oh, that's sad, or that's, making them cry. It's just another healthy way to really acknowledge loss, and really, and that is the reality of it. There's a lifetime in those mementos. There's a lifetime in those belongings. And so, it's easy to say, I think you should get rid of dad's stuff, or you should be doing this. I always tell people, you do that in your own time, in your own space, in your own way. And can I help you with any of that? If you want to take it down for now, if that makes you more comfortable, I'll help you put it back up later. I don't know if that really answers your question, but
absolutely, it does. Yeah, it almost justifies the course of action that we have taken, and just trying to be supportive. These are great memories, and most of them are extremely happy memories. I understand that that sense of loss is always going to impact, but I appreciate the advice. Linda, thank you. I really appreciate you doing this. I'm excited to be able to come back in 2 weeks. Remember, everybody, with the exception of 4th of July, Linda will be here every other Thursday at 11 o'clock Eastern, and we will record this series, and it is on demand. We're going to have Linda will have a folder under the webinar series that will have all of her really cool, healing modalities and white papers and so forth. But really grateful for your time, Linda. And in case anybody wants to get to you, wants to reach out to you before they get to be educated again in 2 weeks, how can they find you?
Well, they can first find me on my website, which is morningdiscoveries.com, and that's MOURNING, discoveries.com. My phone number is there. My email is L like Linda, F like Findlay, 6643@yahoo.com. Anybody's welcome to email me. My phone number's on the website. I'd be happy to talk to anybody who wants information or has questions. I mean, I love that. And again, grief education is so important. It can help us to do our jobs better, and it can help us to support our own loved ones or ourselves when we're grieving.
Yeah, thank you for everything you're doing, just for the population in general, certainly for us, Linda. Look forward to seeing you again in a couple of weeks.
Thank you. Great being here.